All right, time to check in with Chris Dimakos. Our feature, of course, brought to you by the good folks at Silver Star Mercedes-Benz, who remind you want to check out their brand new showroom, now officially open. Get some great deals as well. Right now, they got a really an interesting deal going on for you. If you want to get yourself behind the wheel of a 2023 demo, you can get a GLB starting at only $696 a month. This is a Mercedes-Benz, folks, but only while they last. So stop by the showroom there at 7800 DeCarry Boulevard, just north of Jean Talon. Silver Star Mercedes-Benz online, silverstar.ca. Chris Dimakos is on the line, our legal contributor. So, Chris, vacation time now upon us. And according to what I'm reading here, you're suggesting suddenly vacation time, which I think a lot of people just used to take for granted. You get your couple of weeks, call it a day. Now, of course, things are a little bit different. Number one, there's Quebec law that actually states minimum vacation times that people are entitled to, but also including this as a negotiation tactic or factor, if you will, in an employment contract. So let's deal with that first with respect to what the government says you need to be able to be given.
Right. So many people, we have a set of employment standards, and these are not what the employer has to give you. It is what the employer has to provide as a bare minimum. So they cannot go lower than what the law states. And when you're talking about somebody who has, let's just say 3 years of experience at a company, you're looking at 3 weeks of paid vacation. That is the bare minimum that's entitled by law. And the way you calculate that, and if you have less, well, then it'll be 2 weeks, and you can have an optional third week, which is not paid. But what's important when you negotiate with an employer, a lot of times the main concern, the main negotiation tool people use is salary. And sometimes employers, especially these days, if you have a head of a department, they have a budget for payroll. And if they have $1 million budget for 15 employees, every time someone wants a raise, well, that's going to take away from their budget, and they got to start working numbers. So it's always important to know that there's other things you can use to negotiate your contract, such as vacation. Many more employees now are saying, okay, you know what? If I'm getting paid $60,000 a year, and that includes 2 or 3 weeks of paid vacation, well, if somebody else is offering me the same amount of money, but they're giving me 6 weeks paid off, well, it's a way for the employer to not raise, their overhead and their payroll. But at the same time, you're getting paid more for every week that you work. You might have the same salary in the year, but you worked a lot less. So there are other things that people are using these days, such as vacation, to negotiate better work conditions, because so many companies now are trying to keep costs low when it comes to salary.
Okay, so, that word again is there, negotiation, right? It's the same idea. Your employer might sit down and say, well, here's what everybody gets, and that's the end of that, no conversation here. But again, Chris, as you often say, this is really just a jumping off point for negotiation, right?
It absolutely is. And the way that sometimes employers and employees, the problem is many times people don't bring it up. People don't raise it. And then if you don't bring it up, if you don't offer it as an option, some employers don't even think about it. So when you sit down for an annual review or a performance review, or to discuss what the next year is going to look like, any opportunity where they're discussing the future of the company, and you feel like you want to bring up what your role is at the company and how much you're going to be compensated, there's always room to bring in these different facets. And I tell people all the time, it's not only a question of negotiating with your current employer, but many times we've seen these days, there are headhunters or professional recruiters that go out and try to find. These are things that you have to negotiate. So, for example, if you've accumulated a certain amount of vacation with one employer, that should be your starting point with the next employer. And all these different things, if you add them up, it could be expenses, car allowances, different types of things that the company is going to reimburse for you. Sometimes the company, the way they're set up structurally and from a financial perspective, they feel a lot better paying off or reimbursing you for a car payment than there is just overall salary increase. So
Okay.
I think the message here is, enjoy your vacation. And sometimes vacation shouldn't only just be about you getting your 3 weeks paid while you go away on vacation. That should also be used as a negotiation point to try to improve your work conditions at work. Many people are doing it, and companies more often than not are saying, yeah, we want to look at that instead of just giving you a 2% annual raise. We prefer giving you some time off that's paid, which in the end, you'll end up making more money for doing less work.
Okay, so now I will bring up the question of part-time versus full-time as well. How much sort of room do you have if you are just part-time?
Yeah, that's a big one, especially for the younger employees. I get this question a lot and say, well, I'm not entitled to the same vacation because I'm a part-time employee. And the law makes absolutely no distinction between part-time and full-time. So if you are, let's say, a student who works on weekends 3 days a week, and you've been there for 3 years, you're still entitled to your 3 weeks of paid vacation. Now, you're not going to get 3 full weeks of a 5-day work week pay, but you're going to get your what you usually make during the week, whether it's 3 or 2 days. You're entitled to that paid, and I see often many young employees get taken advantage of because they're not aware that they're entitled to that. So it's very important to note there's no distinction. The law doesn't say, well, you're part-time, you only work 20 hours a week, so you don't get the full paid vacation entitlement that a full-time employee would make. That's completely false. There's absolutely regarded as the same when it comes to the Quebec law.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Number one, with that initial reference, Chris, earlier on to you worked there for, 3 years, you're allowed to, by law, 3 weeks off. If you've worked at a place 15 years, right, where's the top end of that? Like, where does it top off, or does it?
That's a great question. So again, labor standards, we're talking about bare minimum, but I could tell you for a fact that I rarely see employees who have been somewhere for 15 years and are only having 3 weeks of paid vacation. In fact, they have a lot more. And what an employee of 15 years also has, what people negotiate, is not just how much vacation you make. It's to discretion as to when you can take it. Because employers, from the outset, usually have the right to enforce vacation and say, you know what, we're going to need you to take your vacation during this time because this time is our busy season. But as the employee starts to garner more and more seniority, what I've seen is that they start to have a lot more discretion on when they can take their vacation. Not just a question of whether it's paid, but also when they decide it's best for them and how they take their vacation. So again, what we have in terms of the law is bare minimum. But as you continue to gain seniority, these other types of I guess attributes of your employment contract are something that you should continuously try to negotiate, continuously try to push forward, because it accumulates. Don't try to go for the whole thing at once, but every year you want to try to squeeze a little more something out of your employer, so that you can make your contract that much better.
So I would ask I don't know if this applies or not, but I'm wondering, have you seen cases, Chris, where this negotiation back and forth has not worked out and say an employer just said, you know what, I don't want to go through this every year, you don't work here anymore, and can end it based on something like that? Has that ever happened that you've seen?
Yeah, usually if it's raised as a point of disagreement, it's usually not the real point. There might be something else there, and they're using that as a premise for why they're not happy. But more often than not, when I see a company that has an employee that delivers on performance and they're happy with them, they continuously try to make them happy. And in fact, what some of the employers that I represented, they try and beat the employee to the punch. They want to offer the raise or the increase in vacation before the employee asks, because when they know that they can control that and they can offer less than the employee would ask. So, for example, if they're afraid of an employee coming to ask for a $10,000 raise, they'll bring the employee in and say, hey, you know what, we're going to offer you a $3,000 raise just because you're that good. You didn't even have to ask us for it. And in the back of their minds, they're trying to save a little bit of money by beating you to the punch. So it's not only a question of the employees asking, but sometimes employers want to keep their best employees happy, and they'll make offers without even the employee requesting it.
Yeah, I will point out, by the way, and it's funny because this has changed a whole lot, hasn't it, over a generation? It used to be you get your 2 weeks and see you later, and that was the end of it. And now it's, as you said, it's a point that's open for negotiation. It's very different from what it used to be.
And we know so much more now about mental health and work-life balance, and now what we're starting to see is, like you said, 30, 40 years ago, people were just getting their 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and that was it. But now we're starting to see how important it is to keep your mind healthy, and that involves sometimes taking some time away from work. So more and more vacation time and paid time off is becoming a critical point for contract negotiations.
All right, and that's where we will leave it. Chris, thanks so much. Appreciate it.